Thank you very much, Don, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This particular session focusing on meeting the demand and capturing the opportunities in Indonesia is, I think, particularly timely. And not just because we're following in after Catherine Marriott's talk, where she actually focused on some of those, but finalised her speech with a few key points about what we should be doing in the future. But there are a number of other reasons why I think this is particularly opportune. And before I actually introduce and bring my panel up, I just wanted to take a few minutes to run through some of those things. First of all, the recent visit by the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, has certainly provided a new level of optimism at all levels within Indonesia at the moment, both government and business. Now, it's been mentioned once before, but I can't emphasise to you the significant change that actually created. The second point is, and again, this has been raised in today's discussions, last week, the Indonesia-Australia Business Week, which was led by the Trade Minister, Andrew Robb, invited over 350 businessmen and businesswomen who were also very well received during that period. Now, during that week, Minister Robb outlined that he had had discussions with his counterpart, the Trade Minister for Indonesia, and that the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement is back on the table again. Now, it's been stalled for quite some time, but it will begin discussions shortly. The third aspect about why this is particularly timely, and for those that don't know, the beginning of next year actually marks the opening of the ASEAN Economic Community. Now, this actually means that throughout that region, trade will open up and it will become the largest emerging economic bloc in the world and 7th globally. Now, the combined GDP of this particular area will be something just short of $3 trillion US, and people are estimating that it will provide a potential of up to $3 trillion in trade growth over the next 10-year period. The fourth aspect, as well as the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement beginning its discussions again, Indonesia appears to be working towards regional trade agreements, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, and they've also indicated their interest in joining the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP. Now, this signifies a much more open agenda towards trade arrangements, I believe. And the last aspect is, within the last couple of weeks, Indonesia recently changed some of the regulations that made it a little bit difficult for foreign direct investment, again providing an indication that they're looking to a much more open agenda. So, in addition to all of these other aspects as well, and something that I hope the panel will touch on today, of course, and we keep hearing these aspects, that there's relatively good economic growth, not just within Indonesia, but in the region, and certainly in comparison to other parts of the world. There's a rapidly expanding middle class, there's massive urbanisation, and I believe Jakarta itself will have something close to about 50 million people living in it within the next 20, 30 years. It's predominantly made up of a young population, and consumers are gaining greater spending power, obviously, to purchase aspects. And of course, there is an ever-increasing demand for protein and food in general. Now, of course, all this is happening under the backdrop for this industry of some of the past issues that the industry has faced. Strong aspirations of self-sufficiency by Indonesia, allowing or potentially providing a process to reduce trade. Of course, the 2011 cattle ban didn't help our relationship with Indonesia in this particular sector. Expectations by Indonesia of investment and really pushing and driving the Indonesian industry to be involved. Questions of supply and demand. And of course, I think Ross mentioned the price of cattle and how that might affect some of the operations in Indonesia. Of course, there are economic ups and downs. And part of this as well, there is a possibility for some market price manipulation within the market as the government tries to keep prices down in the wet market. Now, hopefully this panel session today, and I don't want to skip over any of these particularly major issues, and I don't want people to think that the gravity of them is less, but what I want to do today is focus on the current and look to the future. So if I could actually ask my panel members if they could come up and join me up on the stage, and I will introduce as they're walking up here. please. Thank you. So Mr. Richard Slaney at the far end there in the pink shirt is currently the General Manager and President Director of Elders Indonesia. He's held this role since sometime between mid-2003. Dick is based in Jakarta after having served a long time in West Java as the Manager for Feedlots and Elders from early 2002, having arrived in Indonesia in 1995, so a lot of experience himself. He's been involved in marketing dairy, beef genetics across South Asia, not just within Indonesia, having involvement in India and the Philippines. And he's also had extensive work on herd improvement programs with Nestle in India and Pakistan. Next to Dick, Dicky Adiwoso, who holds a master's degree in international management, so hopefully will be able to provide us a lot of insight into the relation aspects of Indonesia and Australia. He's held several positions over the years, including those in finance, trading and international aspects. He has a long-term relationship with Australia, having been involved in not only investing Australia, but has lived and worked here. And I'm well aware he's got Australians in his family and Australians as neighbours in Jakarta. He's currently the CEO of a joint venture with Australia in the Indonesian Feedlotting business in Lampung. And last but certainly not least, Pak Wilson Hassan, who holds a Bachelor of Science in Agribusiness Management, specialising in animal science and agronomy from California State Polytechnic University. His focus has been on nutrition, animal health and feedlot performance, which has allowed the TUM feedlot, which you saw in Catherine's video earlier, allowed that facility to enhance their efficiencies and improve on their reputation in the greater Jakarta area. And anyone that knows TUM will know that I could probably, even if I took my shoes off, I wouldn't be able to count on my toes and fingers the number of Australian ministers that have actually visited that site. Now, all of our panel members are often asked to participate in industry discussions, and they are certainly often requested to brief our senior government officials, our industry leaders and our ministers when they arrive in Indonesia. So I'm going to take the liberty, rather than open up to the floor directly, but I'm going to start off by asking some questions myself as moderator. Now, Wilson, I'm going to put you on the spot first. Now, I touched on the aspect of consumer growth in my brief introduction, but wondered if you could provide the audience with a little bit of an overview of consumers and consumption and the future in Indonesia, please.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Wilson. I think what we're, what we're facing now is very, very exciting. I would say scary with where consumption and demand would be in, say, 20, 30, 40 years. Just to give you a rough figure, there are 4 fundamental things that really drive and push in Indonesian consumption. One of the 4 driving factors, number 1, is population. We are growing annually about 1.2%. We are at this moment the 4th most populous country in the world with 255 million people. The projection of this population, we were projected to enter about 290 million in 2030, and that sheer population size itself is a huge potential and opportunity. The other thing I think is the middle class boom. We are growing 8 million people a year into that segment. I read MLA's report I think a month ago. In 2015, the middle class, or the people earning between $10,000 to $25,000 a year in Indonesia, only consists of about 9% of the population, and in the forthcoming years, 2019, that will consist of 25%. So to give you a scope of how big the middle class and its spending power, which is ultimately contribute and drive consumption, the total number of middle class in Indonesia is projected in 2019 to be 64 million people. If you think about the entire population of South Korea, it's only 50 million and 67 million in Thailand, or the middle class would be 2.5 times the entire of the entire population of Australia. So that in itself will really drive consumer, dietary change. Because also the other thing, not just, figures, but I believe we are a very young nation. We have favorable demographics, which is 50% of the entire population is actually under 29 years old. And if you see what better education will do, it will actually create nutritional awareness. And a lot of these students are exposed to Western diets, or Western cultures. So all this will contribute to dietary change from a high starch carbohydrate to very high protein, especially beef. Because remember, Indonesia is a great market for beef because 80% of the population is actually Muslim. So pork is not a substitute at all. So I think those factors contribute to consumption and demand.
Thanks very much, Wilson. Certainly a compelling argument, and I suppose we're going to keep hearing this, the potential and opportunity for Indonesia over and over again. Again, I don't want to dwell on any of the past, but do want to, I suppose, if we're going to talk about potential and opportunity in this particular session and looking forward, we need to face some of the current issues that we're looking at present. Dick, I wondered if you could give us a little bit of an overview of some of the issues that you think we're facing directly now and what we might be facing over the next 6 to 12 month period.
Thanks, John. I think in support of what some of the other presenters have said today, clearly the greatest issue for us is a reasonable cattle price. Clearly, if it doesn't rain, we're not going to see any good come out of that for anybody. Price of cattle might be $10 a kilo live. It won't matter because there won't be any cattle. It clearly has to rain, and clearly Northern Australia needs a couple of good seasons behind them before we see some stability in that whole argument. So outside of that, I think going on the back of very recent changes in the climate and the politics between Australia and Indonesia, and going on from what you said, John, from last week with the Prime Minister's visit and this new fresh air, if you like, I would like to see that get some real momentum and see some genuine initiatives to rewrite that relationship such that we are going to stop the noise that comes out of the politics that's been way too prevalent in our industry in the last 5 years. The noise that we put up with in Indonesia in our business is sometimes quite unbelievable. We just go to work every day wondering what they're going to throw at us. The fact that we're still around is testament to the business case of our entire trade. So in terms of the issues for the next 6 to 12, John, supply is the critical one, getting a price that's reasonable, and Indonesians' ability to pay the money for beef that they're going to have to pay. Apart from that, the government relationships possibly, yeah, that's probably about it, I'd say, in the next 6 to 12 months.
Thanks, Dick. I keep hearing, I suppose, the noise in politics and relationship aspects. They've been addressed a number of times, not only through today, and I don't doubt we'll hear much more of it, not just in this panel session, but in the future. Dicky, given your involvement, international relations, given your long history with Australia in this particular sector, I wondered if you could share with the audience, I suppose, your hopes of what should occur between our two countries and what could occur between our two countries. Slightly different question, but the absolute maximum and the absolute minimum of what we should be doing as a nation with Indonesia.
Okay, probably the question raised to me because my hair is white. I've been in this, okay? Yes, the challenge of politics in Indonesia, I mean, what we have to look at it, I mean, it's a young democracy. I mean, we've been living, I mean, this business grew during the period of Suharto era, and suddenly we went through a lot of changes, and this is the very first time that we have a grassroots president, and the grassroots president is basically a populist. So he will take anything in his agenda is a lot of political issue, which is to the consumption of his voters. So it's become a very populist, And then it's all because of we chose him because he was popular, and then and he is not related at all with the former regime. Okay, and this because of his style of presidency, he needs a lot of publicity. Okay, and he is very young and he's testing his policies. We who are a little bit who has more experience in the business a long time, and we are looking at. We discussed it for the last 12 months. It has been the flip-flop policies in Indonesia. We always said that, it's just like you are putting, let's do something like this and push the recalc button, recalculate again. Okay, and it's a lot of public relation approach. But what I would like to put out in here is what you read in the media does not really reflect the policies of they are changing in a better position. Our new president, our new government is learning to become a very it's a learning curve for him, but at the cost of us as a businessman. But again, this is all the dynamics in Indonesia. And we began through this. The business has gone for 50 years, especially the last 25 years. It has progressed so fast that you have to look also at Indonesia. When I compare to the other market that you have opened, Indonesia is not a frontier anymore. It's not something that you go in there and the swashbuckling riders go into Indonesia. It's a mature market. It's a mature industry. The people have, look at the challenge that we have in 2011. Within 3 months, we fix it. I'd say in Indonesia, there are two types of management. One is the burial management. When somebody dies in Indonesia, you have to bury it within 24 hours. And the other one is the wedding management. It will take 2 years to prepare it, and it's costly. So if we really put things together, we can do it within fast. But once you know what the objective is, and that's what actually challenged Indonesia to get, you might have experienced right now the flip-flop policies, but once they get it right, they can do it very fast. So again, do not look at Indonesia as a frontier. You are faced with somebody like Wilson, like Slaney, and so on. They're much calculating. When I started this business, when I joined this business, I didn't know anything about cattle, and I thought it was a learning curve for me also. But it's the changes is there, and then you got to respect that it's a mature business. Yes, so your customer in Indonesia are really demanding an equal treatment, same footings on this. Okay, we are not just a buyer, you're not just a seller. But you have to look at maintaining and also nurture the long term. We are the closest to you guys. Only 4 days by boat. We understand you, but we are so close, but we are so far away as far as culture and business relationship. You probably more as we are. You overfly us over our islands. Okay, so the biggest question right now is always the biggest challenge in the politics of the new government is the self-sufficiency. I think we've gone through 3 presidents of having self-sufficiency. Again, every time there's a why is self-sufficiency agenda is very strong in Indonesia? Because a mistrust. There's a mutual mistrust within our neighbors. Okay, so 2011 didn't help. Okay, but now because of that, the populist government have to make sure that they're picking up this agenda. Self-sufficiency, we're going to be our own. We can produce our own cattle and so on. But again, the lack of understanding of the real economic value of red meat production is the one that really the challenge for us for the policymaker to understand. Our president went to one of the breeding center in West Sumatra believe Catherine Marriott and John, you've been there. And he was told that the guy started 4 years ago with 70 cattle. Right now, he have 1,000 cattle. And then it blew our mind. I mean, even every single of us said, how can you do that? I mean, did we find a new technology at all, how to breed cattle and so on like that? So those kind of information will be picked up fast by the young government to accommodate their political agenda. This is what we have to tell them. We are not trying to teach them, but give them, empower them to understanding what is the real economic value of red meat. It takes 9 months before birth. It also requires 15,000 liters of water. It requires 30 square meters of land per kilogram of meat. And that's something that we are trying to make them understand. There are two sides of the government at the moment. One who are trying to understand it because they really understand is according Minister of Economics and also Minister of Trade. Luckily, Jokowi appointed Minister of Trade become the liaison officer with Australia, and we hope to do that. But on the other side, we have this strong populist, we call it the nationalistic chauvinist officials who believe they can do it on their own. So the challenge is there, but I think it will take another year until we really understand. And when the year comes over, we will do a burial management within very quickly done.
Thanks, Pak Dicky. Again, picking up on a couple of themes that you had in there about the level of mistrust that has been in there in the past, and that it's not the frontier, and we've got to nurture the long term. Wilson, I wondered if you had anything to add on that in terms of what Australia should be doing a little more of, I suppose, with Indonesia over the coming 5-10 years.
There is one particular aspect I think would like to touch base on ASCAS. ASCAS is great, but if you look what happened in August when maybe you've heard about the police raiding, or there was an explosion in the price of beef, and well, the government actually said on TV that local cattle, that there's actually enough local cattle, but to bring them into Jakarta is not possible. And the very reason why he said it was because that the abattoirs in Jakarta, or the greater city Jakarta, are actually, they have the ASCAS system in place, and so it blocks out competition or discriminates against local cattle. We know that's not true, but it's a perception. I believe there's a room for improvement in how we can engage the government, because the government has I guess the right way to put it is the sense of ownership. They don't have a sense of ownership over ASCAS. So until today, I think we still need to push ASCAS and actually engage and educate them in the different levels of the Department of Agriculture, because the government official on national TV saying that actually, it gave a very big misconception about the Australian trade and the live industry. So he says that we're blocking out competition. Imagine if he had bought into ASCAS, was engaged and was involved, then he would have a sense of ownership, and I believe he would not have said that. And I believe that there's room for, let's say, MLA to engage a government, and particularly universities that actually have animal husbandry as a program. It doesn't have to be too many, but work with the big ones. So I can give an example. So let's say Temple Grandin, which we took 2 years to invite. Imagine if there was 10 times the amount of people that came. But just to give you a fair example, Patri, my supply chain manager, actually tried to invite one of his associate professor, to attend the seminar. The reason he could not attend was simply everybody else's reason was accommodation. We do have to acknowledge that government officials work on budgets, so sometimes they they are willing and would like to participate in some of these events, but accommodation has to be provided. So working with university, working with various levels of government, and inviting them over to the events and seminars about ESCAS, about the new programs that you launch, gives them a sense of ownership. And we may not see that today, but I believe we're planting into the seeds of the future, because one of the students or one of the people sitting in the audience could be your next Minister of Agriculture for Indonesia or the next generation leader. So I believe the sense of ownership from the Indonesian government for programs has to be there, so that we sort of, not seen as ESCAS is an Australian program. No, it's not. It's a great program, but it just needs to be more engaged to the government.
Thanks very much, Wilson. To take up on that particular point, I'm not sure if people are aware, but historically the Indonesian cabinet has actually been made up of a significant proportion of ministers who have actually studied, be it masters or even a PhD in Australia, where I'm not sure our cabinet members in Australia could actually say the same thing about Indonesia. One quick question to you, Dick, before I sort of throw it out to the audience. I mean, we talked a little bit about providing Indonesian government with a little more ownership and engaging with them, developing relations with universities and the regional governments there to also keep them in the loop of things. But what should industry be doing in the future?
There's no question, John, in my mind that the level of engagement between Australia and Indonesia in terms of this cattle trade has to be ramped up big time. We heard from Ian Mars there earlier that Brazil's on the way. I said to our ex-chairman of MLA some years ago in 2008, when we were on the verge of 650,000 cattle into Indonesia, that I believed MLA were taking the market for granted, and I pushed him to open up an MLA rep office. And we went louder and louder, and eventually MLA opened a rep office. I believe that the relationship needs far, far more than that. It needs to go much deeper into the education streams. There's quite a few little activities between universities in in Australia that are involved in programs in Indonesia, taking their students to Indonesia for a week or two or three. There's some minor programs of Indonesians coming down to Australia, including the NTCA, deal with some animal husbandry students come down and work on properties and see a bit of the territory. That's all good, but it's nowhere near enough. There's nowhere near enough. We need hundreds of scholarships fully funded for Indonesians to be involved in agriculture in Australia. There needs to be Australian companies that have a real stake in the game getting involved in providing cadetships and internships and all kinds of stuff with Indonesian students in Australia. They need Australia in their blood. They need to understand us. We need to understand them. We need Australian companies like Elders, and I'm reasonably proactive within Elders itself. Is this mic gone off or what? Still on? Companies in Australia, the big pastoral companies, putting Australians into Indonesia, understanding the feedlot industry in Indonesia, in Vietnam, in China. We need Indonesians working in Elders, in AACO. That's the level of participation we need to see to really form strong foundations in our industry. We should never take Indonesia for granted. After that cattle ban, an Australian said to me, who's lived in Indonesia for 30 years and who's very closely connected to some very influential people, one of the ministers said to him after this cattle ban, he said, you know what? He said, we will eat rats in the street before we are told by the Australians what we're going to do. I'll never forget that. And I grew up in North Queensland during the crisis of the beef depression, when cows and calves were $5 a head. We never ever want to see that again. We should never take the Indonesian relationship for granted, and I believe we've been taking it for granted Less so now today, but for years we took it for granted. And as Dicky said, they're not bloody, what do you call it? It's not an immature industry anymore. They are mature feedlotters. They are possibly the best feedlotters of cattle in the tropical world anywhere. I've had Brazilians come to our feedlot and were gobsmacked at how well we can feed cattle in Indonesia. The Indonesians are good at what they do. And I believe the relationship with Australia needs to be ramped up. There's a heck of a lot of input, but it needs to be a lot more. And it can't be rhetoric anymore. It simply can't be. To put it in simple terms, the Australian industry needs Indonesia more than Indonesia needs Australia, and that's the truth of the matter. And you need to get over that. We need to get over that and move forward big time, and really embrace Indonesia. They are a different culture. They are a different religion, and we're never going to change that. But they are mums and dads and kids the same way the Australians are, with the same concerns and worries every single day that we have. Nothing more and nothing less. And I believe that there's plenty of room for a lot deeper involvement.
Thanks very much, Dick. Well put. We've got about, I think, possibly 20 minutes before this session comes to an end, so I want to throw out to the audience for some questions for the panel. But before I do, sorry, it's good to see that there are people enthusiastic at this time of the day. I just wanted to actually take a little bit of a risk myself and ask some questions of the audience. So I'm going to throw it back a little bit. So the first thing I want to know is, can you put your hand up, please, if you've been to Indonesia? Not Bali. Okay. It's quite a significant proportion of the room, which I'm very happy about. The other question I've got for people is, can the producers and the exporters in the room please put up their hand as well? I just want to identify... No? Yep. Okay. So again, possibly 20% of the room, possibly a little more. One of the things I wanted to ask, and now that you've put your hand up and I actually know who you are, I'm going to point questions at you. What I want to see is, can someone stand up and tell me what you expect of Indonesia? We've had obviously a one-sided discussion on this side of what we're expecting over in Indonesia and what Indonesia's expecting, but what I want to hear from a few people before we move into questions is, what do you expect? Please. And if I could just get you to state your name and where you're from.
Joe Bloomfield. I want really good welfare for our cattle. Our biggest fear is to see another 2011.
Anybody else from the producer or exporter groups? Please, sir. A microphone's coming.
John Dyer, Hayfield Station. We've been there for some 20 odd years, and we've really tried hard to get closer to Indonesian buyers, and it's not all that easy. Time, I don't know, it just seems to, you got a mob of cattle for sale and the agent come down and they say, oh well, we'll give you so much and that's it. We have had Dicky and other people we've met over a lot of years with the NTCA and conferences, but there's still a major gap between the Indonesians and Australian producers. There's no question about it. So who moves first? And how do you organise it? That's the bottom line as far as I can see.
Thank you very much for that. That actually, in some regard, that was the answer I was looking for. I know there are a lot of people that would want to engage, potentially even provide workers from Indonesia down onto their properties, or even processing plants for that matter, but it's very difficult to arrange and organise. I know the NTCA put in a lot of effort to get their program up and running, and it's excellent, but it is only a drop in the ocean for what can potentially be done. On that particular point, given I have managed to drag out exactly what I wanted, anybody got any comments about how we can actually improve that producer to Indonesian industry relationship?
As I said, with regards to education would be one, but I think we believe there's been some announcement from DFAT about some easing of the visa restrictions for Indonesia. I haven't heard the nature of that, John, but it seems absurd to me that Korean backpackers can work in abattoirs in Australia but Indonesians can't. That you can employ a Danish or a Swedish backpacker, you know, on your station, but you can't easily employ an Indonesian. Whether that's because he can't speak English, well, that's another hurdle. But that's a hurdle that the industry needs to face. So, to John's question, what do you need to do? I think it's a whole of industry approach a little bit, perhaps, with NTCA and the other producer organisations structuring something to allow greater interaction to happen, I would suggest. At the mum and dad, at the family property level. The corporate level, of course, it's a different set of issues, but at the family property, small farmer issue, I think that's the way.
That's it?
Right, Dicky, I can see you chomping at the bit.
On that one, just an example. When I came to Australia in 1992, our consul general, the Indonesian government representative, doesn't even know anything about cattle. Only because of Andre, and before Andre, Paharbangan, we pull them to understand that how big is the relationship that have been built between Indonesia and Australia on this grassroots level, and that's something that we are right now building that. Okay, because in the past it has been we are under the radar. Okay, only the last basically last 5 years that Indonesian government really have representative here who really talks with you guys, and the more I think of it is what the NTCA program has begun is you cannot harvest it in the next 2-3 years. It will take 10 years. Example, like I was in the finance industry before. Citibank Indonesia is the school of all the ministers. So every single finance minister in Indonesia are Citibankers. And this is what we have to build right now, that the future Minister of Agriculture, or at least a livestock minister, when we have a livestock minister, which should come from somebody who has been interacting with you guys. So I think that's it's not only sending somebody from Australia to Indonesia to understand for 2-3 weeks, but somebody who's really understand the culture, the lingo, and so on. I mean, it changed my lingo from the last 25 years to speak Australian. Even when I take my wife here, like yesterday, she said, I don't understand what they're talking about. But she wasn't. So that's interaction is basically, like right now, in the past it has been, you are seller, I'm buyer. I just want to have 5 cents, 2 cents cheaper. But for that to understand, right now, people are much more understanding when we talk with the government officials that we know it will take 1 year to book a ship, to plan your breeding herd and so on. When we explain to them, it starts getting click on. But if we have a young minister, a young government to teach that, it takes time. We are lucky in the last 4 months we have somebody who understands Australian culture, who understands Australian livestock, and who was here a few months ago. And he can understand. Now is our effort right now to get more understanding. The decision maker doesn't understand. You find a council, Indonesian council here today. He understands more about the livestock and your needs rather than about 10 years ago. They wouldn't even know. They only stamped the stockman passport, and that's gone. But right now it's interaction like this. But again, education, more people coming here, working. An example is like this program that not only students but also the butcher who came to Australia. One of our supply chain, and he came back from Australia and then he rebuilt his abattoir. I want to be like Australian one, something like that. Those are the link. But you cannot go there and teach and tell them, okay, do you have to do like this and do like that? Okay, no, you cannot. Let them come here, absorb and pick up. They are the one who can filter what can be taken, what cannot. If you go to another country, you will tell them, this is how you actually do it in Australia. And people said, I don't even know how to do it. Ask Dick and Wilson, teaching our staff at the feedlot itself, why you have to close the door of the pen and so on. It takes time also that. Okay. Now for you to understand for you to, like you said, it's difficult to do business in Indonesia with Indonesian, and also Indonesian is also difficult to do business with Australian. But after a while, this is the strength of the last 25 years that we have built the business. It has been disrupted for a while, and so.
Thanks, but Dicky, coming to that aspect on the visa discussions for workers from Indonesia being able to come in for short term into Australia, I mentioned earlier the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement discussions are back on the table. I would hope that would be one of the first things that gets discussed, negotiated, etc. I won't put any government officials on the spot for that at the moment, but please, the Consul General. No.
You can't.
No.
Thanks for the opportunity. I know time is limited, but I just want to say what a privilege to see so many of the folks here who've been to Indonesia. And it's very inspiring that what Dicky and the colleagues on the front mentioned, that it's been a quarter of a century of cooperation. I take note of your concern about the animal welfare. We will register that again. It is a continuous process, but we're two different countries with two different styles of managing cattle, so we will continue to strive to improve. On your experience in the past decade, I can observe that there has been significant improvement, but I think from hearing the speakers in the front, there's something that we should really be cognizant of, and that is what's happening this year and the past few years is very different to what's been happening in the past 2 decades. Now is a time in history where literally, as Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull said last week, that Darwin is a real buzz, the most exciting city in Australia. For Indonesia, we noticed this. For the mere fact that new governments and new leaders in the region and new objectives, and Asia is growing with more expectation in food consumption. What we probably missed in this discussion is the fact that we don't really have a choice. We might not understand Australians, and many Australians may struggle to understand Indonesians, but it's clear that what we've been doing is, the NTCA is fantastic, and the consulate in the past 11 months, we've been doing our best to get more interaction. And again, if you have suggestions, please come to me, and I'll be happy to convey to our officials in Jakarta. But in the past 2 months, the Director General for Cattle came here, especially to see the registered premises, how you load cattle. It is a desire for us to know more how the Australians do it, but as discussed this morning, or by Ross Ainsworth, we have a difference in administration, we have a difference in practices, and that is something that we need to continue to strive. But we realize that at the end of the day, Australia will have to face several markets now. You've got China, Vietnam, and Indonesia, and as you calculate who will be your better partner, I think it comes back really, who do you feel comfortable with? And that's probably why the consulate here is going to keep on trying to facilitate its engagement. Even with the new visas, it's still a trickle-down effect. But I think the seminars in Indonesia, they're beginning to feel comfortable. And Malcolm Turnbull's visit last week, a third of his discussions was about the SEPA and also the agriculture. and that to us means the Northern Territory. So as we move along, I'll be eager to hear your views and what the industries will need to do. From the consulate, we have the preview of reporting straight to the industry ministry or the ag ministry, and definitely a hope for the foreign ministry to move with expectations. But with these new elements, there's a new momentum, a new desire, and hopefully we will not be discouraged by the difficulties we've had in the past few years. But people like Dicky, who's subsidized the industry a lot, maybe we can learn from the mistakes, and maybe we can move forward in identifying low-hanging fruits in this cattle cooperation.
Thank you very much, but Consul General. Very optimistic comments. I'm going to open up to questions now. Someone's had their arm up for the last 15 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you. Val Dyer from Hayfield Station. My question can be directed to each of the panel members. Given the mentioning of the populist president and relatively young president, and the influence, obviously, of the consumers now in Indonesia, and the influence of the farmers, given that there is a minimum price in the policy, and let me know if that has changed, that a minimum consumer price, what is now more significant in Indonesia? The current price, the consumer influence, or the minimum price to look after the farmers? That's some information I'd like to know for our own market intelligence. Thank you.
No?
But Dicky.
I think it's a dilemma between the current price for the consumers and also the higher price for the farmers. Those are the two agendas, and which I don't even know how to balance that into their political agenda. The only thing right now, because again, like I reiterated before, the understanding of the real economic value of producing a kilogram of red meat has not been clear in Indonesia, the policymaker. The farmer would like to sell it at 46,000 rupiah per kilo live weight in East Java. In the meantime, the constituent in Jakarta would like to have the beef at 80,000. Okay. Looking at the permutation of that factors, it doesn't click. Last week, 2 weeks ago, the president inaugurated the first boat, the local Indonesian inter-island cattle boat, and right away, our governor of Jakarta said we're going to have the cattle for 80,000 rupiah, the beef at 80,000 rupiah, because we're going to bring cattle from West Timor. Again, this is something that probably some who have more intelligent in economics calculation would understand. I mean, okay, let have your way, but we'll see. Again, what they're doing is actually trying to accommodate the Jakarta consumption of having 80,000, but is again, what they say in the paper is not actually the policies. Okay, so they would like to put policy, but some of people in the government already understand we will never see again a beef below 100,000. Even we are looking at 120,000, 140,000. Jakarta, people will pay for it anyway. So right now, this is the populist agenda. So what I'll tell you right now, bear with us. Okay, this flip-flop policies. I mean, we've seen it before. Okay, somewhere down the track, reality check will come, I can say.
Yeah, just quickly, I think what the government would like to do and what they can do are two different things. Certainly, they can put some policies in place to bring the price of beef in the wet markets down to what they want. but only for a short time. They cannot manipulate the marketplace in the long term. It's failed before, and it's failed recently, and will fail again. I think from our point of view as a business in Indonesia, I don't really lose sleep over them trying to do what they're going to do. We just get on and run our business. So that would be my comment there, Val. Where is their priorities? At the end of the day, they do want to see cheaper beef. Of course they do. Every government in the world would like to see affordable food prices for everybody. Is the price of beef going to move up around the world? We can expect that it's going to, and Ross Ainsworth's been beating the price up for ages. We're going to start shooting if he comes up to Indonesia again, don't we? So I think that's the reality. So what they wanted and what they can do is two different things, really. Eventually the marketplace, the free market's going to control where that price goes.
Wilson, please.
So if you threw me a question and asked me, would politics overrule or slow or change what consumer demand would be in 20, 30, 40 years? The answer is no. The fundamental demand is there. I seriously don't think any government policy can change that. So I just want to throw it out to give you confidence of where we are. There is a dilemma between the Department of Ag and Trade of what they think is the best, because the focus would, one, be nationalistic, understandably 6 million farmers, and on the other hand, the trade minister is concerned about inflation, which is supply and demand. So the answer would be what Dicky said, that there's going to be a reality check and then they just have to choose. But I wanted to point out that if you don't already know this, the beef industry in Indonesia, the live trade, produces the greatest multiplier effect in the entire industry that exists in Indonesia. It touches and impacts 125 sectors, direct and indirect. We really hope, Dicky, what you said, if we can put the dollar value onto that trade, it's enormous. And I think we have to, we have to do a good job and continue to, educate and share the information across. It's staggering, 125 sectors in total.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to take a little bit of liberty and add to some of those answers as well. In Indonesia, there aren't really any consumer groups, as Australia would know a consumer group. So the pressure itself comes more from levels of poverty and being able to provide the Indonesian people with a cheap source of red meat protein. And more often than not, the farmers themselves fall into that category as well. So it's actually a complex matter and a very good question you asked. Anybody else with questions? I saw somebody earlier with one. Yeah, please.
This session is about trying to mature the relationship between the two countries, and Dicky and Wilson, you've been saying that it's a mature industry now. One of the requests that the Australians have always wanted is more feedback. Producers want to know, how are my cattle performing? And I think with the technology that's been talked about today, we have the opportunity there. If we are the mature industry, we have the technology, and producers want that feedback. What's stopping the producers from getting how their individual animals are performing in the feedlot, how they're yielding in the abattoir? What is standing in the way from that feedback coming back to individual producers here? Because once we've got that, the producers here you will develop relationships at a business level as well as the social and relational areas we've been talking about. What's stopping that information being fed back to individual producers?
Who wants to answer this? Peter, I think, especially for our feedlot, our joint venture, we are doing that, okay? Because, we want to know, because we are actually producing beef. We are not producing four-legged animal. Okay, so when we have to go back, we are looking into the, our joint venture partner brought their breeders to our place, and then my COO Willie has to talk with him what kind of cattle we want. Those are we are conveying the information. It's done when we have the mutual trust of understanding on that one. There's still a little bit, like I said earlier, a mutual mistrust. I mean, in this trade, in the past, always said, at 12 o'clock at night, when we slaughter our cattle in Indonesia, when we sold our the guy who bought our cattle and selling to the butcher, the price of that one will already be in Sydney, which is 3 hours ahead of us, and you cannot change that. So this is something that we have to understand. The arbitraging, price arbitraging will be there, especially right now with the communication. So whatever price in Indonesia, it will be there 3 hours ahead of us, and so you will, so no matter what, the price will be, it will reflect right away in our price when we buy it. So this is something that a lot of my friends in the feedlot said, why do we have to give that information? They're gonna change it, but it's something that we have to make also our friends, also my fellow countrymen understand that those information is also to the benefit for us, so we can talk to our butchers, the carcass shield, the numbers, and so on, and the type of cattle we like to have. But it's starting to some feedlots start to understand that. Okay, that whatever we need. Yeah, see, when we sell the cattle, they would like to know. The main thing they'd ask is the carcass shield. Okay, that's the either 51, 48 that determine the price. Okay, but to produce that, we also have the other factor of our feeding regime in Indonesia, and that's the one that really we like to have. That's what we talk with our supplier, that we would like to have the type of cattle that really can stand those kind of and produce the end product. And that's something that we are right now putting into the mind of my fellow countrymen. That's what we have to get there. You tell the Australian what kind of cattle we would like to buy that goes into the feedlot. And those kind of things we can only get if we provide the information to you guys. So I think that's something that it's a long-term cooperation, that mutual understanding what between the end consumers. We feed it back all the way to you guys. I don't know, Dick, you probably can add on that one.
I think if you work with your exporter, who you sell cattle through, and you were requested, is there any chance of some feedback? And I think if you showed genuine interest in those cattle and went up and followed them through into the feedlot and spent time with the importer, the feedlotter, that you would receive the feedback that you want. I know that I would in our elders' business. People say, Dick, how did those cattle go? I'll say, oh, they went pretty well. They averaged 1.55 at 122 days or whatever. I wouldn't have a problem providing that feedback. But very few producers request it, to be quite honest. Even the pastoral companies, the bigger ones that provide the bigger lines of cattle, don't request it. I wouldn't have a problem with it though.
So there's, just to throw it up, it's a challenge not just for you, actually for us too, because there's 3 layers in the business supply chain. There's the producer, there's the feedlot, and then there's our butchers, right? Even our butchers don't tell us what the carcass yield is. If I do get a phone call, I know that the yield is bad. If I don't get any phone call, it means I'm doing good. That's the only feedback I get. So, but I do realize that saying and acknowledge the importance of actually really measuring and then relaying that up back to the producer, because it does the butcher, we're trying to educate them. It does the butcher no good if, on one hand, because the focus of the feedlot is production, that is maximum weight gain. But at the butcher level, they don't care if your ADG is 1 kilo or 1.5. All they ask is yield. Yield is number 1, because yield would determine how much you can fetch for your, the price at farm gate. So the better your yield, the higher the price of live cattle in your farm. So we've been trying to tell them it does you no good if you don't relay good information to us, because we can be doing 1.5 and say, hey, that's really good, so we're going to keep buying those cattle. But then at the other end, have really thick bones and really heavy hides that, you know, make a loss for them. So I guess the thing is we acknowledge that, and at least from us, we try to in the next couple of years build that system. But also from our company, we've brought up the entire supply chain up here, 10 butchers, and we went around the stations and actually connected the butchers directly with the producers, and also actually a couple of times now, and the feedback was really good. So if there was a request and if we can really develop that, I think, because imagine this, I said the supply chain has the biggest multiplier effect. Imagine what $1 extra would do to the entire supply chain when it touches all of that sectors. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm getting the wrap-up signal from my left here. So I just wanted to put it to the panel if they had any one sort of particular point that they felt they may not have put forward. Now's your last opportunity.
Yeah, one thing we haven't had a real chance to talk about, I think, is the business case challenge. There's no doubt that the reason we feed cattle and do what we do is to make a quid. Not sure everybody in this room's in the same boat. You probably choose to live on the farm because you live on the property, because you like to live on the property. When you run a feedlot in Indonesia, you do it because you want to make a quid. The business case isn't as solid as it used to be, and I'll give you an example. The cost of a kilo of beef coming into Indonesia from live cattle is over $1 a kilo on that live animal. That's the direct cost of the cost of beef itself. It's over $1 a kilo. In boxed beef, it's about 1/5 of that. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out which business is going to endure. And that's one for us to watch very closely. The cost of exporting cattle has climbed probably 4 to 5 times in the last 7 or 8 years. And that's a real threat to our business long term, I believe. And secondly, certainly that relationship issue that we've talked about, John.
Thanks, Dicky.
Okay. We are in live cattle trade. Okay. We are questioning whether the business model is there. What I can tell you is the business model is still there, okay, because Indonesia like to have fresh carcass. There are talk about opening up for other potential supply of red meat protein in Indonesia. But I cannot imagine that. It will be there in the long term. In the short term, it will come right away. I heard about today about the Brazilian beef. They will never send the cattle to Indonesia. It's too long, and they're looking for beef. Again, that's always been the policy, but that is always been the trigger of this flip-flop policies. I can buy cheaper beef in Malaysia and India, but again, the consumer in Palembang, Pekanbaru, or Banjarmasin, they would like to have a fresh meat, and it will always be there. The challenge right now, the price of cattle bringing from Australia is becoming higher and higher, and whether it will come to a stage, become the reality check. Yes, red meat are expensive in Indonesia, and because red meat is expensive, it might be worth to do its own breeding, like what Ross said, okay? But again, the challenge is actually Indonesia doesn't have the land masses that you guys have, and that's what it is. The model is still there, but maybe the bar will go a little bit higher as far as the economic value of that.
Thanks, Dicky. Wilson?
Yes, thank you. I actually have a few things, but let me try to get it short. Written here. The one thing I'd like to point out before I forget about annual permit. We are hearing about annual permit. We're very confident it will come out, but we can't say for sure until it's issued. But I do want to point out I think the golden question, the key question is, why now? You know, it's something we've talked about for years. I think it's a good question to ask, why now? I believe there's an expectation from our government about why they're issuing annual permit. And in my opinion, it's really two issues, two expectations that I strongly believe that we both have to work together to fulfill. The first thing would be supply. They would like to see more consistent supply. I believe with annual permit, we can overcome that. But I think the second issue would be pricing. Look, when I went to JBS, they said the price of beef in the coming years will just continually go up and increase, the gap between itself and the other commodities. And beef really isn't for the common people, unfortunately. But I believe that the government has an expectation on price in terms of, we're not saying that the price can't go up, but I believe they do not want the price to be fluctuative. The dynamics have been very, very incredible over the past year. Feeder price have gone 30%, increased 30% over a year. And I've been talking to some people, and the message is, I don't think next year is a year where, I believe next year will be a year of adjustment. We're not caught up with the price of cattle. We're making trading loss of 60 cents. And come January, we'll make trading loss of 60 cents. That's $180 with 300 kilo initial weight. And then on top of that, with your feeding costs, you might just break even without having money to pay for your interest in your bank and your workers. So I think we can only hope that the dynamics, which is outside of factor, like currency, the rain, all those things, come together, and that will fulfill that expectation of the government. And I believe we can continue to negotiate and work together on having better terms. But we'll see where that is. Lastly, I guess from a feedlot point of view, I think where we talk about supply, I just want to touch base on one issue. Indonesia is transitioning into a very extreme rapid urbanization rate, which is to say a lot of people are leaving the rural areas and going to the cities. We're at 52% urbanization right now, and we'll hit 71% in about 2030, and what that does is in the urban area, the growth for beef in the next 40 years is 1,700% in rural area. And with that many people moving to the city, urbanization rate, we have increasing supply, but at the same increasing demand. But at the same time, unfortunately, it's the same case everywhere in developing or developed nation, is that the younger generation have not considered the agriculture career as the priority, and they have not seen the value for it. So between 2003 and 2013, we lost 6 million farmers. So we shrink down from 31 to 25 million. So there is an increasing gap between supply and demand. I believe that there's an opportunity for Australia, a very, very big opportunity. And so I've always had conversations, and people ask me about $3 when it was like a couple years ago. Or well, what do you think about feeder price at $3? Because it's a magic number. I hear that you get a good return, and maybe you start, being able to expand. And my message to you is, now you're getting it. I believe you have to rapidly expand infrastructure, fencing, and if it's part of the agenda, the infrastructure. I'm hearing that wet season closes down 50%, access to roads and cattle. I believe there's an opportunity to increase that accessibility and also utilize, 50% utilization of land in Northern Territory. I think there's a big opportunity, and you should have the confidence, because we're not very far from, I dare say, I don't know, 1 million, 1.5 million a year. You might not be able to support that, but that's the business case. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's at this point I'm going to call a cease to this particular session. Just quickly, I hope you've got a little bit of a flavour for the potential and the opportunities in Indonesia. And just quote a figure that was produced in a report a week or so ago, that beef consumption is set to grow over the next 40 years in Indonesia by over 1,300%, which is also in line with the beef consumption growth, the sheep meat and poultry consumption growth for that country. Again, hopefully you've got a little bit of a flavour. We've probably only just scratched the surface for Indonesia, but certainly potential, a lot of opportunity. Supply and price kept coming up as a question. Please, and with all due respect to our journalist colleagues in the room, don't listen too much to the noise in politics and media. Keep in mind that Indonesia is not the frontier. Please don't take it for granted, and there's obviously opportunities to engage a little bit more. I think, and I would hope, that there's the ability for producer groups to develop programs into the future that will not just benefit themselves in getting feedback, but will also assist the Indonesians in terms of education and possibly even working here sometime in the future. That was one hell of a sentence. All right, it must be that time of the day. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your attention, and if you please help me in thanking our panel speakers for this particular session. Thank you.